love it. I'm impressed that you just set this all up.
I'm impressed with myself too. It usually doesn't happen. Like it's wild. Okay, let's have some fun. On.
Have you ever looked at someone from a distance and thought, geez, they have it all pulled together? They're positive, they're fit, they're cool and successful. I do it all the time, and that's what drives me to uncover the story behind what we see. You see, the thing is, it's what we don't see. That's where the power lies. How they got there. What they went through to achieve what they did. The battles they fought, the battle scars they have, and the lessons they learned along the way. That journey and that story is what defines people. From failure comes life's greatest learnings. Failure teaches us our biggest lessons. The question is, do you recover from failure? How well do you recover? And what are you going to do with the lessons that are a result of that failure? My guest today has one hell of a story. There are so many life-changing events in her journey. It's hard to believe she had enough life to live them all because she's only in her 40s. She is a beautiful example that you can transform your life. The life you started out with can be dramatically different from the life you are capable of living today, from learning from those failures, from making them something grand in your life. I have been wanting to have this conversation for a while now, and I've been asking for it since I met her after hearing her story. So I am so happy to welcome the one and only Amy Ledin to the inner circle today. It finally happened. You were holding out on me.
This is true. This is true. You were pretty surprised probably when I said yes so quickly this time, right?
I was, absolutely, because I was expecting another no. But
I needed to jump in.
And why did you need to jump in? Are you at that point in your life where it's just time?
I read something recently that said by not sharing your story, you're actually still showing that you've not moved on from that and that you haven't changed. And so I'm like, why am I not sharing it? I'm not that person that I have shamed, or I've just evolved so much that I need to.
And Amy, your story is just, the learnings from it are so great, and that's why I can't wait for the audience to learn from you today. So I want to begin by taking us back to little Amy. Where'd you grow up? Because I hear an accent in that voice, even though you call Toronto home.
I know, which is crazy. I don't know where this accent's from. I actually grew up by Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Born there, small town,
Okay.
700 people population.
What?
Yeah. Farm town.
Okay.
My parents owned a grocery store. In fact, our town was pretty much owned by my grandpa, the entire town. He was a politician that had a hardware store and a hotel. And so my dad got the grocery store.
Oh, wait, so everybody knew your family.
Everybody knew our family.
You discovered your voice at a young age.
Yes. And I was an only girl,
Okay.
4 brothers, a pretty strict religious upbringing.
Okay, what does that mean? Like, what would you call strict?
Well, what I think other people, lots of, what we would see maybe as rules. I was raised LDS, I'm not quiet about it, which is Mormon.
Still
and
practicing today?
I'm not practicing
Okay.
anymore.
Okay.
Small community. And I always say that, sometimes in those smaller communities, it's not even really a good picture of what that religion is like. Right. And so small community. And then my parents announced one day that we were moving to Hawaii, like no joke, sold the business.
Why?
I think bigger businesses were like Walmarts were coming in, and the mom and pop grocery stores were just not really doing well. And so my parents knew they needed to get out. And so it was kind of a joke that my mom loved Hawaii. And so they actually made a bet. My dad's like, I won't go unless, you get me the job there. And so my mom filled out all the applications and got him a job. So my dad worked for Costco.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Okay, just pause though, because their dad was an entrepreneur. Is that where the seeds for entrepreneurialism were planted in you? Because you were the powerhouse today, and we're going to dig into that later.
For sure.
But did you learn it back then from dad and grandpa?
100%. My grandpa. I have a picture, still a Polaroid of my lemonade stand where my grandpa, I remembered him after I got all the profits, he came quickly and took away the costs of things and showed me that, you got to buy the lemonade. You got to, rent the card table. Like, it was a great business lesson right off the bat. And so I think just seeing all my relatives own businesses, I just assume people do that. And so when we moved to Hawaii and see my dad working for someone else,
Yeah.
that was definitely different. And just a culture shock. I mean, I went from, I'd never seen a Black person in my life.
Right.
Outside of exchange students that had lived, we'd had a couple exchange students. So then when I moved to Hawaii, you're a minority. You know, you
Right.
go, I am a blonde white person. My first day of school, I had a girl push me off the sidewalk and call me an effing howley. And I'm like, what is this? Like,
Whoa.
so it was really, I mean, I say it's such a blessing. It has opened my eyes to seeing other people's cultures and stuff, whereas I don't think I would have had that opportunity not living there. So as much as at times I maybe didn't like it, because there is some racism sometimes involved, and it's just their own insecurities, right? But not seeing that as a kid, it was hard. I had to learn to really show up and stand out, because you wanted to meet friends, and you know,
course.
so. And you know, growing up, I was always the chubby one, so my nickname was Piglet from a young age.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Because you were stunning and you're fit, and that's your business now. But that back then,
Yeah.
so you struggled with weight back
All
then.
my life. I was
Okay.
on Weight Watchers, I think at 13. You know, so much that I watched a struggling mom to the point that she had a gastric bypass when I was 25. I went and took care of her. So all her life, I watched my mom try every diet with me. I mean, to the point she put me on fen at 18, you know, just and not knowing the right way to
Of
approach
course.
it.
I mean, and a lot of kids, like years ago, that was just what you did, because
Yeah.
you like it was a mystery how to battle weight. You go and crash diets and do
Yeah.
those things. So, you know, looking back, she was just what was the norm back then.
Totally. I mean, slim fast, you know, you did it. And so I felt like I mean, it was a blessing, because I always said the fat token friend. I mean, I just call it like it is. I had beautiful friends like Miss Teen Hawaii, you know, and I was the chubby girl, but it forced me to shine with your personality. You know, I was big into school politics. You know, I was class president, student body president. You know, I got really involved in that way, and always tried to be a peer educator. So I stood out in that way, and didn't lose my weight until, you know, after I was married. But definitely my upbringing, you know, people would know me that way.
Okay. So tell me about the teenage years, because they were interesting and brought, can I say, quite a life-changing event for you.
For sure. So growing up, I think, in that restrictive, you know, religious background, and then having parents, and I don't even blame my parents, you just don't know any better, having communication about certain things.
Yeah.
We didn't ever talk about sex or things like that. So
Well, it was prohibitive, wasn't it?
totally.
Yeah.
And, you know, I had a boyfriend. He was also a member of the church as well.
Okay.
And, you know, it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen someone do this lesson, but they get a chalkboard and they say, you know, I'm going to list all the places, like first base, second base. So they say holding hands, next is kissing. And then, you know, it might be like, they used to say heavy necking and petting, right? Back in the
Right.
day.
Yeah.
And so we would have like the person teaching the lesson, he'd go, okay, so I'm going to start here and you tell me where to stop. Well, as soon as he would get to like necking, before you could even say stop, he would just take the chalk all the way across the board.
Oh.
And his point was, you can even have the best intentions. It wasn't like I planned to save myself for marriage, but you put yourself in situations and
Yep.
your hormones are raging.
Raging.
You know, a very toxic relationship. I mean, we would both say that. We were very young and looking for love, both of us. I mean, I would say it was super unhealthy, not knowing. Ended up pregnant,
At what age?
17.
How did you process that, and how did your parents accept that?
Oh, I remember actually worst case scenario thinking, I mean, will I get kicked out? Like what, you know, you're always thinking the worst.
Kicked out of the
My
family?
house, you know,
Okay.
how would I, you know, I didn't even know. I think what happened was I'd just gotten my wisdom teeth out. And so I was having nausea after, and my mom was like, oh, I'm sure it's the pain pills, stop taking them. And then I kept throwing up and kept throwing up. And so my mom actually left for a couple weeks that summer and went back to the mainland. And that was when I found out. And so I had to wait for her to come home. And so I hid it actually for probably 3.5 months, which was I had one friend that
Oh
I
my gosh.
confided in. And I had such bad morning sickness that we would take plastic bags on the way to school, because I was in school. I was a senior. I had everything going for me. I'm talking, I was student body president. I had done everything in terms of like what I knew to apply for college, in terms of being the well-rounded student. I was, you know, I played sports and made sure I was involved in community things. I was hoping for that, you know, full ride or whatever. And so when I got pregnant, I mean, Hawaii at that point was in the news for having one of the highest teenage pregnancy rates. And so I knew I was going to need to, one, resign. I'm not being the example, but it was just, I mean, I wasn't old enough to even process that I was having a child, honestly, if I look back. Like, I think still not even realizing it my whole pregnancy. Like, and luckily I made that decision early. What happened was we sat down and, I knew that he was going to live on a different island. The baby would have to go back and forth, one. And two, I wasn't ready. Oh. And so growing up, it was like, well, if you're going to have a baby, then you get married. And so we were planning to get married. And then I remember my oldest brother calling me and he said, man, can you believe in like a month from now, you're going to be a married woman? And it hit me. And I'm like, this is such a toxic relationship. Like, we are really only doing this for this child. Mm-hmm. And so at about 6 months along, the church has an organization called LDS Family Services. It's no longer around, but they do the adoption process for you, everything, which, is like, I'm sure just convenient as well, mm-hmm. right? But nevertheless, you can't have children. They have a criteria that they had to be LDS, but they also, have to be infertile. And I really liked that. And so my boyfriend and I at the time, we went through, like 1,700 applications, and we both ended up with 7 and came to the last couple the same. We went in separate rooms and picked the same couple.
Oh my goodness.
And so I knew that was, who I wanted to place with. And so for the next 3 months, we had communication, still not knowing what I was about to face, still being in denial. And then just going through that, I think having a baby, I mean, I was still in school. So I really just took off a little bit of time and came back. Luckily, because I was so involved in my school, mm-hmm. I had a really good principal that he's even my friend on Facebook now. They let me go to like a separate class and kind of accelerate my classwork so that I didn't have to sit in the classroom being 7 and 8 months pregnant, because I was due in March and I was graduating in June. And so I just, and in the Hawaiian community, in the culture there, they do what's called hanai, and that means the family just raises the baby. So my parents got ostracized a lot because why are you not hanaiing the baby? And I didn't know this was going on. Like, I didn't see the pain my parents were going through. I just remember the night I decided to tell them, and I was, scared to death. My friend even said, I'll be up in your room just in case, like we were really thinking that. And I just watched my mom just cry. And now being a parent, it's just that you're sad. Like, they weren't mad at me. They really weren't. It was more like, wow, we have to watch you now grow up really actually overnight. Like, you just have no choice. Mm-hmm. And so I did, right after I had her. And I still probably, even next to cancer, probably the hardest thing I've ever done, because it's a wound that never heals. Yeah. And, I don't know if I'll ever get to meet her. And so there's that the vulnerable side of me is always like, I don't want to admit I want that, because I may never get it. So that's, and just needing to grow up and looking around you and seeing all your friends that get to go out and play and stuff like that while you're at home. Because even though I didn't bring the baby home with me, I had to go through all of the physical changes, and now going into college life with stretch marks from a child that you don't even have, and needing to eventually share that with people that you date, and knowing when is the right time to share that. Right. And, people that know me now they don't really see the picture. And I think one time with my husband, actually, Eric was like, Amy, I'm like, listen, I want you just to go back to high school. Just visualize being in high school and watching someone walk in your classroom that's pregnant, mm-hmm. and tell me the thoughts that go through your head. The shame that I carried from that really just, I think I took through the rest of my life, because I was really tied to the religion, and I believed what I did was wrong, and I'm unworthy of certain keys to heaven or whatever. And that really just, not forgiving myself for that, I think really just kind of led into a lot of the rest of the next 15 years,
Giving her up for adoption, has there been any connection with her? Do you know who she is? Have you met her? Where are things at? So
it was a closed adoption. So the way the closed adoption worked was we got letters for 5 years, just one a year, that I could just send a letter and they could send a letter. And it was hard at first, because it's like, what do you say? And I'm now being a parent, I don't even know how they would, I'm sure they were like anxious as to what to say. Right. And they were always amazing. I mean, one year they sent me a watch, and at first I'm like, what a weird gift to get, and then in it, she said, we want you to know that every second of every minute of every hour of every day, we are so thankful. And I'm like, this watch is amazing.
Right.
So they were just incredible people. But at the
Yes.
5 years, we, I think it was actually at 4 years, I had reached out and said I was ready for us to let them move on with her and not have that worry, I think, of me being around. I think I felt partially like that. And I also was getting married. I got into another relationship and wanted to
Move on.
And so no communication forever. And then just last year, out of the blue, my brother had sent a photo album that kind of just triggered that, because I really had buried it. I never spoke about it really much after that. I did a little bit, and then about a year post baby, it was like nothing. I didn't talk about it with my family. And so it kind of sparked it for me. So I actually reached out for my social worker, and she had such a common name. And so I'm like, how am I going to find her on Facebook? Found that I had a mutual friend of, this person, and messaged her and said, hey, I placed a baby for adoption 22 years ago. I know it's going out on a limb here, but I'm looking for her. And this is, her name, this is my name. And they'd already changed her name and everything. And she, within hours, replies and says, you are not going to believe this. Your daughter was just in Hawaii 2 weeks ago looking for you. So I
Oh my gosh.
freak out,
Did
because
you start bawling?
Oh yeah. I mean, so I started to have like that just anxiousness. So I start looking through her friends list, my social worker.
Okay.
And I see her name because it had slipped up. So we had fake names for each other.
Okay.
And so I knew her real name was Annie. And so I went looking through her friends list, and I saw her. And so I wondered, like, I'm going to her profile, and I'm like, is this her? Is this not? It's the most eerie feeling, because you see a face that looks like could be part of you. And then she had a post on adoption. And so I immediately screenshot it. I sent it to my social worker, and I said, this is her, isn't it? And she said, yes. And she, shared with me, what she was like. And then I said, well, what's the process from here? And so the agency's no longer around. And so she said, well, give me your information and I'll pass it on. Nothing. And no one, even Eric, didn't really understand, when you have 22 years of not having someone in your life, and then there's that potential, you become psycho. You're obsessed with your send receive mail. And I got to the point where I'm watching my viewers on stories, which you don't want to go through 1,000 viewers, line by line, looking to see if in that few first days, if she'd seen my stories or anything. Nothing. And so I was getting a little bit frustrated. And then I came to dinner and met some friends, a girl that was adopted. And she shared with me that once she found her dad, she got cold feet and waited almost 2 years. And it was like God just telling me to just stop making this about me. And I also learned, had I met her last year, I probably would have been a hot mess and a little too emotional with it. And, I don't, it was a good growth time for me. Lots of crying.
And we'll dig into why you would have been a hot mess about in momentarily, but I appreciate that vulnerability in that story, and it shows that your humanity. I think anyone would react the same way. You want so much, and you want to follow them, you want to call them, you want
Totally.
But the fact that you were able to take a step back, and how you put it, it's about her, not you. It really was. So that's tough stuff. Thank you for going there. So you move on with your life, and you open the door by saying then you were ready to get married. You found love, and you did.
Yes.
Okay.
Got married, and he joined the military. So he was Hawaiian, from Hawaii, and never thought he'd move away. And so we were clear on the East Coast for most of our marriage, away from family, everything. And I had a good marriage, what I would consider a good marriage. My kids would say a great marriage in the sense of what they saw, because we didn't really fight. We were good friends. Two kids.
Okay.
Not a lot of passion, I would say, but friends.
Yeah.
And, over time, me still seeking out, I never sought out physical attention. I think I had a childhood history of some sexual abuse. So that's never been something that was like a backdoor, thing for me. So even after I lost my weight, when people would, hit on me, I'm very turned off by it. It's a super, trigger.
I need to interrupt here, and if you
Okay.
don't want to go here, you don't have to, but you threw down something pretty heavy there. You said you had a history of sexual abuse. You kind of just put that in there. That's big. Do we want to walk through that door?
I've not addressed the person that it is involving. It was a family member.
And it happened to you.
Mm-hmm. And this was stuff that came up even during my adoption. Meaning like my social worker was like, is there a history of like sexual abuse in your past? Because a lot of times people that are, I was 15 when I started having sex, like sometimes that is, I'm not saying it's for everyone, but why are you seeking out? What are you looking for?
Right.
Where is that coming from?
Pattern.
And then fast forward, my mom having a conversation with me, asking me, if I was, and I'm like, no, I was so upset about it. And then brothers asking me. And so it was an area that I just never really wanted to uncover. And then through, believe it or not, I thought it was a business block a couple of years ago. I went through some RIM therapy, and I already knew based on some of the stuff I've tried to block out about, just being honest here, we'll just lay it out there, masturbating at a young age. Mm-hmm. I was really young, and I never knew what was wrong with me. Like, why am I 4 years old and doing this? Like, why would I even know that this is feeling good?
Wow.
And so full circle older, being able to, know that. And so it just started to, when I started to uncover a lot of that, I hate going to 6-year-old Amy. Like 6-year-old Amy's no fun because I'm like, what more do I have to uncover? But that probably led into, I was very achievement driven.
Yeah.
That was my way of shining without getting any physical attention.
Right.
So fast forward in my marriage, rolling along, and I hire a coach. This is after I'd lost, 90 pounds. So I'd already lost my weight, and he saw value in some of the mindset stuff, and I started blogging for him. It's my husband now. And I liked it. Admittedly, if I'm being completely honest, it was like a void of, it was like filling something, because an affair is, I had an affair. We'll get there.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm going to pause you right there because there's a lot going on here. And I want to first close the loop on the sexual abuse to make sure that we all understand it happened at a very young age.
Very young age.
And you completely blocked it out of your mind until you did some work and you got to the root of that's where it started. Am I correct in that?
Some as a teenager, I knew, but because of who it was, honestly not wanting to
think about it.
Remember
that.
It. And
Got
even now knowing, because Eric and I are going to confront that together, and my family knows about it, and we've talked about it. I've talked to my mom about it, because then I saw so many patterns of just what I even was like looking for in a man, physically, because that was just, what I saw as love, power.
Well, that unfortunately became your normal when you were introduced to it, right? At a very, very young age.
Right.
You thought that everybody was probably, when you're that young,
Right.
you don't know that no one else isn't going through it.
And then I think I must have gotten wind of something being wrong, because like with masturbation or something like that, that's usually the thing that I think people think is deviant, and then they don't share it. They don't, I didn't share it with my mom. Like I said, at 18, she confronted me again, like after I'd had the baby, and was like, we need to talk about this. And I was just so repulsed by the idea of it happening to me that honestly, I didn't want to own it. And if I'm being completely honest, I didn't want someone to think I'm a freak, or I'm crazy, or I'm weird, or something's wrong with me, or something is going to be wrong with me because, she's, you know what I mean? And so keeping that in, and then when it did come out, there was just, I couldn't stop it. Like I said, I thought I was having a block in my business, and it was related to something completely different, and it wasn't.
In your childhood. That's why we always begin there. I want to close the loop on this because you mentioned that you and Eric, your current husband, are going to confront this together. Before we bring Eric, we're going to bring him into the scene early here, but what does that mean, you're going to confront it together? What are you going to do?
Because of the family member and knowing, I think just closure. Honestly, for me at this point in my life, it's, I'm so sorry for you. Like,
You're going to confront the person that did this to you?
Totally.
And it's a family member. You're...
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So...
And your mother knows who this person is?
Yeah. So
This is so heavy, Amy.
sorry.
Like, your strength is beyond anything I can wrap my head around.
Well, thank you. I've been through what
are you hoping to happen from this?
I'm actually sad for him. Like, I really am, because I know he's so messed up. Like, you just have to be at that point. Like, that's the, and so it's like, I really am, because he's had to live with this his entire life and knows I know. And so I think for me, it's more of like, because I'm a Christian and I'm a God-believing person, I want that person to have all the gifts that I've been given to.
Yeah.
And it's more like, I forgive you. You got to forgive yourself.
That's huge. There's so many lessons there. And we don't need to dig into who, but it was a very close family member. Our hearts are with you when you go down that road. We admire your strength, and there's great learning from that. It just speaks volumes as to the type of person that you are and wanting to pursue that. So we're going to go back to that first marriage you were talking about, where all of these feelings came up. You're married, you have 2 children, you thought you were happy-ish, didn't ever go about seeking attention.
Never.
And then all of a sudden this guy, Eric, walks into your life, and you said you were blogging for him.
Well, first I hired him as a coach. I'd already lost all my weight, and so the
What kind of coach?
He was a physique coach. Like, at the time I thought I wanted to compete.
Okay.
Which is so funny because
100 pounds you lost?
I'd lost.
You must have felt like...
I felt amazing. I reach out to him and I'm like, I want to hire you. I want to get on stage. He goes, you have no business getting on stage. So immediately I'm like, who are you? And he ended up coming back and saying, listen, you've done something that's so incredible. I don't want you to get up on stage in a subjective sport when it is about some of your genetics and symmetry and all of that, and you feel like a piece of crap when you've literally done what most people can't. And so It was a blessing. I was not happy about it at first. Like, I'm like, you are mean, And then after that, I just liked his philosophy, his no nonsense. We became friends. I started blogging. I created a thing called a food sub calculator. We now have an app for, like, we just did a lot together. Mm-hmm. I was attracted to him, if I'm being honest, from the get-go. But not realizing, we laugh about it now, like, you kind of attract what you're used to. Yeah. And so I attracted my dad into my life, kind of some of those, like, things, which we realize now we would never be married had we not both fixed ourselves. So I kind of always try to tell people, like, we did have what I consider good ending, but most people don't. The grass is not greener on the other side. And so I was friends with someone of the opposite sex. We were really good friends. So we start, first talking, like, you're just venting. And that's where it starts, right? You're like, oh, my husband did this today. Or, and he'd be venting about his wife, and you validate each other, and it feels good to be validated. Mm-hmm. And then it feels good for someone to make you feel so important. And I liked the accolades of the high achiever type status. Sure. And let my guard down, obviously. We crossed the line, and both being, like, Christians, we were like, this is terrible. We immediately were like, we need to pray about this. Like, this was a mistake. No more, obviously. Like, I'm married. I don't believe in divorce. He didn't believe in divorce. Mm-hmm. So we made the mistake of, okay, well, let's all be friends. Let's bring our spouses into the friendship. What? Truly believing that this was a one-time thing. So let's all be friends. So we all became friends and continued down that path for a while, still knowing I was attracted to Eric and vice versa.
Could your husband see that? The husband at the
No,
time?
He didn't.
Okay.
And that was the hard thing. So fast forward, we go to a football game together, and his wife encourages us to go. My husband even says stay in a hotel that night because he got tickets to the game, and he chose to go with me, which I'm like, red flag. If my husband came home now and said he's taking Carrie to the
I'm with you, girl. I love you, but you're not going to a football game with my husband.
Looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, how did they not see? But in the meantime, my husband was addicted to Oxycontin. He was in the military. Okay. Hold on. So, should I pause?
Yeah, just pause it right there. You can do an edit.
I figured.
I was going to do that. Okay. So pick up the story from your husband was addicted to Oxycontin.
Okay. Oh, yes.
Oh, boy.
I know.
This plot is unbelievable.
I'm sorry. I'll get it quick here.
Okay.
So in this whole time while I'm going to football games and stuff, Kevin was addicted to Oxycontin. He'd had a back surgery, well, gone bad. I mean, for 10 years, the military just kind of masked his pain with injections, and to the point where he finally was humevaced off a submarine. Like the Red Cross got him off and he needed major surgery. Because of his job title, and they've invested so much money into him, they just want to mask it. So they just let him work on Oxycontin. And he got addicted to the point that he ended up in a Veterans Affairs rehab facility. While he was in rehab, I found out I was pregnant with Eric's baby.
Oh my goodness.
So that football game, that time that we spent the night in a
Yes.
hotel, we were drinking, which we knew what we were doing. That one time in that whole period, I got pregnant. Didn't find out till, of course, 2 months later, I started getting sick.
Yeah.
Now, I knew it wasn't my husband's because, one, he'd had a vasectomy, and I'd had already 2 tubal pregnancies prior in our marriage that I'd had 1 fallopian tube removed, and I was told I wouldn't have any more kids.
Wow.
So I wasn't thinking anything. So when I started getting nauseated, I remember texting, Eric one morning, saying, 'cause I live in the States. He lives in Canada. That's the other thing. So he's a Canadian. I'm living in Virginia. So I was like, I'm feeling sick, He said he had a wave of like, but didn't think anything of it. And then fast forward, I took like 15 tests. I don't think I've ever taken more tests in my life. And that was probably the second lowest at that point time in my life because, when you talk about people's like limiting beliefs or beliefs of themselves and you can either prove it right or wrong. When I got pregnant, it was like a flashback to 17-year-old Amy.
Right.
Because I was getting pregnant during a shameful period, out of wedlock. And boy, did I was just in such a low place that I really was starting to believe the negative self, like, all the self-talk that people say to themselves, I was believing it. Like, I'm like, man, you really are white trash. Like, what are you doing? And but everyone around me not knowing like the pain, because you've also hurt that other person, and it was a public affair. We both had businesses online. He had a big business online. And so, there was someone that even started a blog about me, like just about our affair, and said adulterers make ugly babies. Like, it was terrible. And then I had to, I find this all out while he's gone, and we'd already been sleeping in separate bedrooms. And so when he came home, I knew I had to tell him. And so Eric and I had both decided that we were going to tell our spouses the same night. And Eric was great. When I called him to tell him, I thought my life was over, obviously. And he said, we can't cover a mistake with another mistake. Like, we have to own it. We have to, because I was really thinking at that point, I need to go to Planned Parenthood. Like, I cannot face this. Right. Even with my adoption roots and knowing how important that was to me, I was still contemplating it because of that fear.
Okay.
And I think the point of me even sharing that is you just never know what you're going to do or think. And I never judge people for those initial thoughts that they have about something, because you just don't know what you're going to be thinking. And he came home and I said, I have something to talk to you about. And he goes, well, before you say what you're going to say, I want to tell you that I'm finally ready to work on the marriage.
Oh, God. I was not expecting you to say that.
Yeah, I wasn't either. And I'm like, my heart sunk, and because Kevin's just an amazing guy. And I said, I got some bad news. And I told him that I'd been having an affair. And he was like, with who? I said,
no idea.
I said, with Eric. He goes, with Eric? Like, our Eric? I said, yes. And I said, it gets worse. And I told him that, I was pregnant. And he was like, are you sure? Because he knows how hard we had tried before. And I'm like, yeah. And he was amazing. He sat there obviously just in shock. And we initially tried counseling. Like, I was still a big believer in, and I know now, me being at the level of just my maturity, my confidence, my growth, my marriage would have worked. I do believe that. I believe that all marriages take work, and people need to kind of get that, like, it's never going to be greener. However, it wasn't that time. I wasn't the person I am now. And we went to counseling, and he couldn't let go of, there's a baby always connected to me from someone else. And I totally respect that. And Laura too, as much as she wanted the marriage, there's this child involved. And so my husband was incredible. And he said, I want to do something for you. And that is, when we tell the kids, I want to be the one to tell them that you're having a baby. He goes, because right now this is like a stake in a fork in the road that with your children's relationship. They can either hate you or they can love you and see you through this mistake. And so he took a lot of the ownership in the conversation.
How old were your kids at the time?
11. Well, no, not 11. 8 and something. It's been almost 10 years. So like 8 and 11. 8 and 12.
That's heavy.
And an 8-year-old little girl that really didn't understand, like, how would you have a baby with someone? She even asked that. She goes,
how do you have a baby with anyone but daddy?
Her first question, you're having a baby with Mr. Eric? And so then dealing with, because, you know, Kevin wanted to be supportive of me because he knew that I was just broken. I think he just knew that I was at a broken place anyways. And because he knew a little bit of my history of my childhood and knew some of that because some of that behavior came up in our marriage. I had a few triggers where he was touching me in a certain way that I freaked out. And so I think he just had some extra. I mean, I always say that Kevin was an angel, like brought into my life at this time that just really has just always loved me because even after the fact, we're friends. You know, he was just here last weekend with his wife. We vacationed with them.
You vacationed together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is remarkable.
And Laura. So coming full circle, you know, when we had to tell them, and it wasn't an easy road. Like that first year, our kids Leilani didn't meet her brother and sister, Eric's kids, until she was 1 because Laura just didn't want them to meet. And I totally can understand. It was so hard for her. I mean, she just hated me and I get it. I mean, I was her friend. How could I be a friend? And what she didn't understand is I didn't even love myself. Like, that's the thing that, like, I can't even pour into a spouse, even a child, when you really think about it, if you don't love yourself.
Yeah,
and so, you know, as much as, like, I'm sure they wanted answers of why, I couldn't give that. And so, you know, I mean, fast forward now, I mean, Laura and I are great friends. I mean, I'm actually going to help her get on a dating app, you know, to find. So, I'm bringing her on my podcast to have the hard conversations of, you know, how do you get past this? Because I mean, she's the epitome of forgiveness in my opinion.
That is, like, it's so next level. It is hard to even like latch into that.
Totally.
When did you finally leave, Kevin, and you and Eric decided to venture out on your own?
So Eric came down for the delivery. We still didn't know where things were going to be because at that point I was really I needed to heal myself. And so I'm like, I can't go into another relationship and I need to make sure that I'm not just doing this for a child and that I'm really I'm supporting myself. Yes. So I moved out and luckily I had started an online business. Eric had actually given me my first handful of clients because what had happened was the week that I found out I was pregnant, I had just signed a year lease on my boot camp facility that I was launching. How do you have now I'm going to be a single mom, pregnant, going to be hard. So he said, I'm going to give you 10 online clients and let's see where this can go. And within probably 2 years, I was making about $500,000, you know,
oh my
with my online business. Yeah.
There's that entrepreneurial spirit and where it all began.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable. Online coaching and doing that.
I brought on a team, you know, I had at that point like 3 girls working for me as well. But, I mean, I was in the hospital having Leilani and I had clients. And it was a saving grace for me because from that point, you know, Eric and I didn't get married until Leilani was 2.5. So for 2.5 years, I lived in Virginia and he was a long-distance daddy. And then during that, as you know, I got cancer.
Yes. So we're just going to roll that into the whole conversation. Remember at the beginning when I said she's done more living in her short years? Can I ask you just how old are you?
41.
Yeah, 41. Okay, so now we're going to bring cancer into the picture not once, but twice.
Yeah.
What happened? What was the diagnosis?
I actually got first diagnosed with colon cancer. So I went in after I had Leilani. And it was over a year. Thank you.
Leilani.
And I was having a little bit of rectal bleeding, thinking, you know, so I went in to get checked and they did, saw some polyps, totally not related, ended up finding a mass in my colon and I had to have emergency surgery. I had 11 inches removed of my colon.
Oh my gosh.
And I was diagnosed with stage 2 colon cancer. What my doctor didn't do, obviously, was test that tissue. So I went on chemotherapy drugs afterwards for probably almost close to 2 years. That was what they thought were treating this colon cancer, when really I went into remission briefly, and then it came back on my hip. It was on my iliac artery, like right next to my iliac artery, right on my hip, another mass. And it was non-small cell lung cancer.
What? Okay, wait, how is that even possible?
Right. So a lot of people will not be found usually with like lymph nodes sometimes in your lungs, but it has been found in people's colon at times. The hip was not something that I had in my research because I started to become my own advocate at that point. I hadn't really, read anything on. Now they immediately then started to they wanted to do like radiation. Well, where it was lying next to the artery, no one wanted to touch me. Like for almost 3 years, I had to stay on chemotherapy to basically just manage the size of it, with every now and then needing to like cycle off because your organs become inflamed. And so it became my normal to like just always be on something, with every now and then having the scare of like,
I'm confused. You need to clarify. Small cell lung cancer?
non-small cell lung cancer, stage 4.
Lung cancer. So was the colon cancer
was not colon cancer.
It never was.
No.
It showed up there.
I mean, they'll never know, right? They don't think it was because, I should take that back. Nowadays, you're seeing more people come with like 2 different types of cancer in their lifetime.
Okay, yes.
The
I've
chances
heard
of it
that.
in a short period of time are pretty slim. And given my trauma, so that's the other thing, non-small cell lung cancer has been linked a lot to a trauma-induced cancer in females.
Wow.
And that's how I found Joe.
Disease leads to disease. But I
Right.
thought it's linked to smoking.
No. And did you know it actually kills more females than breast cancer?
No.
Yes.
Well, so many women are now living with breast cancer, but this is crazy.
And this is a demographic. It's like when I got diagnosed, it's like 35 to 45-year-olds, non-smoker, healthy people that are getting it. I mean, there's a guy in my community that I found that had an ALKG mutation like I did, because I had an ALKG mutation, so I needed targeted drug therapy. He was the same. And he was like, never smoked a day in his life. I didn't smoke. I grew up Mormon. I didn't even drink coffee.
That's what I was going to say. Smoking, it wasn't even allowed.
No.
But, okay, so you get it in 2 years of chemotherapy.
2 years of that, finding out that I have that. So then they start targeted drug therapy, which you realize it's a money game. Like, thank God I had a successful business. Thank God Eric had a 7-figure business as well, because my drugs were $13,000 a month. And you start to learn that it's like a rich person's, like therapy, that if you don't have the money, you don't get the same kind of treatment. And so,
But wait, aren't you living in Canada by this time?
living in Canada, but immunotherapy and some of the targeted drug therapy, because it's so expensive for the government, they're not offering it.
So you went to the States.
So I went to the States. I went to MD Anderson. I hired an advocate. When I got really bad news about 2 years ago, where it was like they were running out of options. And, I'd met other people that have been on drugs for like 7 and 8 years, but your organs, it's the quality of life, and I wanted a miracle. Like I really did. I wanted to be in remission. They told me that they usually don't ever have no evidence of disease. It's usually just no evidence of active disease, right? And I wanted to be Ned. Like I was like, I want to be the person that gets to ring the bell. Like most people that have lung cancer, they don't, because the chances of it coming back within 6 months is, high.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like, I wanted to find out everything. And I learned that just like in anything, medicine's a practice. And so you need to find people that have more experience and they've had more cases, because then more cases lead to more options for you. And so that became kind of, like an obsession with, we found an advocate that I'm like, I need, options. So we tried different, experimental drugs. I even tried having a vaccine, injected into me. Like, we tried it all, just hoping. And then last year, I was told that they were out of options, and we'd spent, probably close to $1 million at this point. And Eric had been amazing through those last couple years of really just giving me so much belief, like doing so much in our lives, like traveling and purchasing things that I knew he thought I'd be around for. Our dream house, stuff that I'm like, he's got to think I'm going to be here, So when I got bad news that day, I usually, it was always, Eric kind of knew my pattern in that I would take it out, on him. Usually I'd be upset. I'm just angry at the world. Like, why is this happening again? And so that day he'd been, luckily reading a devotional, and he's like, listen, we've said all along that we had to go in with 100% faith. So either you're in or you're not. Do you believe you're going to be healed or not? And so even though the scans were saying everything wrong, I was like, you're right, we're in. And so I said, I want to have new scans in a couple weeks. I want PET scans again, CT scans, like we'll pay for it, whatever. And they came back 2 weeks later, clear.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You got your miracle.
So I got my miracle. And at that point, then MD Anderson was like, no, we want to pay attention to this case here.
Wow.
We're really interested in how, and I had read about Joe Dispenza and listened to him, and I knew mindset, and I'd already done a lot of that during
Yes.
my, journey. But the going all in, and so many people say it all the time, but it's in your lowest of low. You can't just say it. You have to live it, and you have to bring the feeling into it. And so we started that next. I was just on a mission to live as if I'm not dying.
Unbelievable. That's why you are probably one of the most positive people I've ever met. And you are always smiling on your Instagram. I love the way you dance all the time,
Oh.
like just full out. So 2 years cancer free, right? Hasn't even shown up.
No, hasn't
See,
shown
that
up.
is that. There's your miracle. That gives
Totally.
me goosebumps. Oh my gosh, I can't even. There's so much more we need to talk about, and we have to get it in there. So I'm going to say, you and Eric got married.
We did.
Blended family of
Blended
5
family,
children.
5 children.
How happy are you? Scale of 1 to 10.
10. And I would say, I say that with the, it's hard. I mean, I don't ever like to say something different simply because we came from an affair. You can't expect that to be a healthy relationship when you've built a foundation on sand. Like, you've been deceitful, you've lied, you've done everything in the beginning of a relationship that will never make it last. And so I'm so grateful that we went on a journey together. We kind of called it our midlife crisis. And, we were really open with our kids, where we were like, we need to heal the childhood, and that's when I started going into like childhood healing and, just meditation and all the things that I'd never, lots of therapy. I'm a big, I think everyone should do therapy, because I think that when you start to realize, I'm not looking just to have a good marriage. I'm not looking just to have a good life. I want to have an exceptional marriage.
Yeah.
And in order to have that, coming from where we came from, it's daily work, daily work.
How many years married now?
5.
Okay. Tell me about your business, because I want people to understand you're still doing what you started with, right?
Yes,
Online coaching.
yes.
You and Eric together?
Yes.
Don't you work well together? You don't fight?
No, we work really well together, because we joke that our it's like science and compliance, meaning Eric is the science guy.
Okay.
He's Mr. Logic, like he loves evidence. And my experience with my fat loss is what really helps him understand the dieting. Like, I can't have restriction. I can't label my foods good versus bad. Like,